All right, welcome Daniel Nation to our monthly podcast. It is good to see everybody back on again this month. And this month we have a special guest, Congressman Nathaniel Moran from Texas. And we're super excited to have him on our podcast this month talking about national security issues as well as the election that's coming up this month. And to help me co-host tonight, I've got my very good friend Ashley Thomas on the call tonight. Ashley actually hosted Congressman Moran for a luncheon at her event with Freedom's Fund USA recently, and that's where I met the congressman and said, hey, we've got to have him on the Daniel Report to talk about some of these security issues going on with our nation. So Ashley's going to help me co-host tonight, and I'm going to let her go ahead and introduce the congressman and take the first round of questions. So Ashley, welcome onto the show and go ahead and take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Brandon, for asking me to co-host with you. And thank you, Congressman Moran, for joining us today. It was such a pleasure having you at our Women for National Security luncheon and having you kick that off for us. And I'm so glad that Brandon has you here on the program. For those who may not know, Congressman Moran, he's a Texan through and through. And he has been the congressman representing Southern Smith County. His formative years were spent growing up in a single-wide trailer home on that Bible College campus, where he learned from his parents the values of hard work, service to others, and service to God. He spent most of his childhood exploring the woods around the Bible College, riding bikes on bumpy county roads, and shooting snakes with his BB gun along the West Mud Creek. Nathaniel and his family eventually moved to White House, Texas, where he attended White House ISD and graduated in 1993, proudly serving as senior class president and captain of the Wildcat football team. It was during Nathaniel's fourth grade year at White House that a love for public service rooted itself in his heart, as he was guided by his father, closely followed Ronald Reagan's bid for re-election as president. To this day, Nathaniel considers himself to be a Reagan Republican whose conservative values have been shaped primarily by his father, President Reagan's service, and by the strong, steady voice of the Rush Limbaugh over the talk radio airwaves for more than 2 decades. So after high school, Nathaniel attended the United States Military Academy at West Point for 2 years before transferring to Texas Tech University, where he ultimately earned a BA in Russian language and area studies, an MBA, and a law degree. It was at Texas Tech that he also met Kina, whom he married just 1 week before starting law school. Upon graduation from law school, Kenna and Nathan moved to Tyler, where he began practicing law, and Kenna began teaching elementary school. And for the past 2 decades, Nathaniel's civil law practice has focused primarily on business and commercial litigation. Nathaniel began his elected public service as a member of the city council for the city of Tyler from 2005 to 2009. And after 2009, he was reelected to his 3rd term on the Tyler City Council. He was then appointed as mayor pro tem and resigned immediately to move his family to Houston for 3 years so that his oldest son could attend a specialized school for the deaf. The unexpected opportunity to relocate his family for this purpose led to the miracle of his son learning to speak by age 7, something that they did not think was possible. Upon returning to Tyler, Nathaniel returned to the practice of law and began giving back to the community through service with numerous nonprofit organizations, including the Boy Scouts of America, the Discovery Science Place, and more. At varying times over the past 2 decades, he also has been a Sunday school teacher, church deacon, trombone player, which is impressive, and a coach of his daughter's basketball teams. In 2016, Nathaniel was appointed to the Smith County Judge to fill a vacancy in that position. As Smith County Judge, Nathaniel served as the presiding officer of the Commissioner's Court, Chief Budget Officer, Judge of the Constitutional County Court, and Chair of the Juvenile Board, Head of Emergency Management, and Chief Administrative Officer of the county. In 2018, he was elected to a full 4-year term as county judge. And then because of his work in the area of mental health, Nathaniel was then appointed to the Texas Judicial Commission on Mental Health in 2021. He's proud of his decades of volunteer and elected service to his community and looks forward to continuing to fulfill the calling of service in Congress. Ultimately, Nathaniel seeks to fulfill the great commandment found in Matthew 22, verse 36 through 40. Congressman, thank you so much for being here with us. And I tell you what, your background is so impressive. And I know with your congressional work, you sit on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Can you tell us a little bit as to why you decided to run for U.S. Congress and what it's like sitting on the Foreign Affairs Committee?
Yeah, thanks Ashley for that question. And Brandon, thanks for having me tonight. What a privilege it is to be with you guys and to talk about these important issues. To answer your question bluntly, Ashley, my question always has been in my life, Lord, when, where, and how would you have me serve? It's just a matter of service, and I think we all have to look at our lives in that manner. That God calls us to a specific vocation in this world, but there is a greater calling that we have. It's a faith calling, and then our family calling comes next, and our vocational calling. But if we keep those in priority order and remember that whatever we're doing, we have to do it unto the Lord, and we have to ask him, okay, Lord, in this vocation, when, where, and how would you have me serve? And I really felt privileged to be able to do that in kind of the local area, doing things, going back to grassroots events of like being a precinct judge and a precinct chairman and those things, just showing up and to volunteer for campaigns, but then getting a chance to be on the city council. And then over years, as you begin to give back to the community, you say, boy, this is an incredible opportunity to make a difference in the lives of people around me. And then when Congress came open, when my former Congressman Louis Gohmert decided to step out of this role, I said, Lord, this is the opportunity that you've given me to serve a greater number of people. And First District of Texas really is 17 counties big. It goes from Tyler up to Mount Pleasant to Clarksville up to Texarkana, all the way down the Louisiana border to Hemphill and Pineland and those areas, and then back to Tyler and everything in between, including Longview and Marshall. I mean, it's a great area. It's a rural area. It's where the pine curtain is. We got more pine trees than people here in East Texas. And I love that. I absolutely love that, because the natural beauty around here reminds us really who's in charge in this world, and that's our Lord and Savior.
That's amazing. And, I think having someone like you to be representing the great Smith County area in Congress is essential, especially when you know that what you are called to do is rooted in your faith and then your passion to protect freedom. Speaking of freedom, we see what is going on across the globe with a lot of conflict happening. What would you say is the greatest threat to our national security right now?
I think we've got three major threats to our national security right now. One is our domestic economic policy. That's number one. Number two is our border issue, our porous border issue. And then number three, abroad in particular, is China and the growing axis of totalitarianism. And this goes back to your first question, is when I came into Congress, we're trying to decide which committees are we going to try to position ourselves to get on and where can we make the most influence. And even though I have a Russian degree from 25 years ago, and I loved studying abroad and loved understanding other cultures and how to interface and how to actually, frankly, influence those other cultures into a place where we can have more democracy around the world. When I came into Congress, I had not been, it's not like I'd been in the State Department for 20 years or anything like that. But I remember Chairman McCall saying to me the week before committee selection, he said, I was telling him how passionate I was about standing strong in this world, that America needs to stand strong and be that light, be that beacon that Reagan talked about. And he said, man, if you're so passionate, you need to get on this committee. You need to be on my committee with me. And I said, absolutely, then I'm all in. And it really has been a fascinating journey to be able to stand there and speak truth to the rest of the world. And that's what it's about. I reminded a group yesterday as I talked to East Texans here about the importance of our voice abroad. When we are looking at these, this rise of axis of totalitarianism and these threats from abroad that are coming from Russia and China and North Korea and Iran, that axis of totalitarianism that's working against us, and they're working against us to isolate us here in the United States because they don't want our influence around the world. They want their influence around the world. And that works against our national security. So all those three things I mentioned to you, border security and our economic stability domestically based on the decisions we're going to make about debt and spending, but then the external threats of China and the growing axis, They are all interrelated. So we can't just ignore one. We've got to deal with all three of those. But China's a threat, and it's because they have this long-term plan, and they've been working on it. They've been steady, and they've been patient to undermine the influence of the United States around the world, and it undermines democracy. It undermines the rule of law. But here's what I think we get caught in today. We get caught in these buckets. People think we're binarily either isolationists or globalists. I mean, that's what they'll want to put you in one bucket or the other. And the truth is, we don't have to be either one of those. We can keep our national security at the forefront of every decision that we make, and remind ourselves that it is America's national security that's at the forefront. But we also, in that same breath, can recognize that in order for that to happen, in order for us to have domestic security, national sovereignty, we need to be influential in every corner of this world. And our voice matters. The voice of East Texans, those that I represent in the 17 counties in East Texas, their voice matters. And so when I talk to the Europeans, when I talk to the Southeast Asians, when I talk to my counterparts around the world, and I tell them this is the way it needs to be, from an East Texas perspective, a Texas perspective, I'm speaking truth into that world discussion, that world dialogue, that if we're not speaking truth into, somebody else is just rolling over and letting them dominate the conversation.
Absolutely. And, I think one of the things that a lot of people have been looking at particularly is the conflict that's going on in the Middle East, right? I mean, you look at the budget, you see how much money has been spent in Ukraine. Then we have the conflict in Israel as well. Last week, we had surpassed the 1-year mark of when Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, 2023. It was horrific, what transpired then. And we still see that the conflict is still going on. Israel has the right to defend itself. And then now here it's expanded into Lebanon. What would you say in terms of this conflict that is happening? Do you think that there is an end to this in the near future? Or do you think that this is going to prolong and expand even more wide, since Iran likes to use their proxies to create the conflict?
Luckily, I think that Israel appropriately is ignoring the Biden administration's weak foreign policy again. We've seen weak foreign policy over and over and over, beginning with the Afghanistan withdrawal, which has given really incentives to this axis of totalitarianism to push forward with their tyrannical intents. And we saw it with the Iranian proxies going after Israel. Israel appropriately has ignored the Biden administration, as you know, and has gone into areas where the Biden administration said don't go into, and has used military tactics that the Biden administration was hesitant about. Strength is the only way to peace. I've said this in the past couple of weeks several times online, that if we want real peace, stability, and prosperity in that region for all Arab countries and Israel, all that want and truly desire peace, we need to eradicate the terrorist groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and we need to send a very strong message to Iran. When you go back to see where Biden unrolled some of the prior sanctions against Iran as soon as he came into office, and now he's got himself surrounded in his cabinet with pro-Palestinian, pro-Iranian folks, and you see it on the campaign trail. They're afraid. Now you see Kamala afraid to talk about pro-Israel issues, afraid to pick the governor of Pennsylvania as her running mate because they're scared of the backlash from that far-left Palestinian squad viewpoint. That is weakness, and weakness will only embolden the enemy and will only create more conflict down the road. Peace will come when we can eradicate evil. And make no mistake, there's a good side and an evil side. There's a side here about democracy. There's a side about totalitarianism. There are two distinct sides. And the problem with America has been, for too long, we've kept our thumb on the scale. We have not been an advocate for Israel, but we've tried to be some kind of arbitrator in the middle to keep both sides kind of even and say, well, we see both sides of the issue. No, at this point, there is good and there's evil. We need to stand on the side of good. We need to stand on the side of life. And that's the side that Israel is on. We need to give them the weapons that they need and give them the open space and the political backing for them to do what they need to do to win this conflict quickly. Because if we extend it, that's a problem. Win it quickly, When it decisively eradicate the terrorist groups, then you'll have peace and stability in that region.
Thank you, Congressman Moran. Let's shift to domestic policy now. You mentioned China being a threat to our national security, and everybody watching this broadcast certainly agrees with that. I want to ask a two-part question about China. The first part of my question has to do with the question that I asked you at the Lunch and Learn with Ashley. And it has to do with land acquisitions. I saw an article in the Epoch Times a couple months ago about a recent land purchase in Wyoming next to a military installation. And in that article, it mentioned the states in which China owned the most land ownership, and Texas was the #1 state on the list. And most of those installations that they own are next to agriculture. They're next to military bases. You can tell that there's a trend with what China is doing. Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders has done an outstanding job in Arkansas of basically taking the CCP's power away from owning land in Arkansas. But our governor here in Texas hasn't done anything. And certainly our Speaker of the House has done nothing to lift a finger to stop this. He actually killed the legislation in our last legislative session to try to prevent this. I know this is a state's issue, but it's also a national security issue. So what can we do on a national level to stop foreign investment in our land?
Yeah, it is a national security issue. August Pfluger has a great bill. I think it's his bill that I'm on that would prohibit anybody connected to China or Russia or these 4 countries I mentioned earlier, Iran and North Korea, from purchasing land that would be within a certain diameter around military installations or national security installations. And then there's also some other bills to try to get at the national security interest of our ag land, which is incredibly important. One of the things I hear about here in East Texas is ag land getting transformed into solar farms. You may not have heard that, but it's kind of an indirect way that our ag land is getting taken from us because – and guess where all those solar panels are coming from? They're really coming from China. So even though that's not a direct Chinese purchase, that's Chinese influence that's now there. We just sent a letter this past week to FERC because there's a hydroelectric plant that's being planned in southern Oklahoma. Josh Burkeen is on this issue too. It's in his district, but the hydroelectric plant would then have transmission lines down into Texas in my district and then back up into Oklahoma. And the permits are still outstanding. And so we sent a letter saying, do not issue these permits because these permits are going to go to a Chinese-owned company. And now that this is exactly what China's doing with the Belt and Road Initiative around the world and their influence and policies of countries where they're going into building roads and they're building ports and infrastructure and utilities. And they're providing all this infrastructure that the global South and Africa and South America and Central America in particular need. And then they're using that economic tie as a way to influence foreign policy. The same thing's going to happen to us down the road if we're so tied up to the infrastructure that China is bringing over here or because they purchase too much land. I have hope that in this next session, in particular in the state of Texas, they're going to follow suit with what we saw with Governor Huckabee Sanders. She's such a fantastic leader and does a fabulous job. I know the state's created this new committee against foreign influence, and Cole Hefner from my congressional district as a state rep is chairing that committee. We've had a lot of discussions with him already about what our China Select Committee in Congress is doing and working on and helping to push those findings down and that information down so that he can use that at the state level to hopefully push back. And I know the purchase of land is at the very top of the list for him and for this committee to restrict. And so I think you're going to see that legislation come through this next session. So sorry it didn't happen this last session, but the people are speaking loudly. And this, in particular, this podcast has been at the forefront of that too. And your voices matter. And legislators and members of Congress, they listen. And so I think you're going to see something happen. And I'll be pleased to see that happen.
Awesome. Thank you, Congressman. The second part to my question about China is this. Some fear that China and other countries have the capability of detonating an EMP in our atmosphere that would knock out our already vulnerable power grid that we have not secured. Also, some believe that China has already hacked into our infrastructure with Trojan horses or viruses, certainly in our power grid, possibly in our water system or other infrastructure. Is this just conspiracy theory among us right-wing MAGA people, or is there actual intelligence to support these claims? And if there is intelligence, what can we do to get China out of our infrastructure?
Yeah, it's not right-wing conspiracy stuff. This is right. This is right in the middle of the truth. I mean, this is right on top of the truth, because I think even there was a North Texas water district that was affected by some cybersecurity attacks. More than 70% of the cybersecurity attacks in the United States come from that axis of totalitarianism that I talked about: Iran, North Korea, Russia, and China. They know, and they are inside our infrastructure, our IT infrastructure. They know more about us than I think we even know that they know from a governmental standpoint. So these are not conspiracy theories. And I think if you were to see a conflict down the road between China and the United States militarily, we're not talking about some conventional aspect of warfare. You're talking about an EMP. You're talking about maybe some kind of biological warfare that affects our agriculture land. You go back to the whole balloon gate, when we knew that China balloon was in the Pacific Ocean, and we knew absolutely that it was headed this way. And the Biden administration kept it quiet. They didn't want to deal with it. They wanted to ignore it. They didn't want anybody to know about it. And then everybody found out about it. But by then it was over our land. And then they're like, well, we're too afraid to shoot it down. That's hogwash. Shoot that sucker down. And we should have shot it down over the Pacific before it got over our land, because who knows what kind of intelligence that they were gathering. And they were gathering intelligence on us. And they were trying to, I think, test us also about our will, frankly, to defend our sovereign borders. That's a problem for us. So there is great concern over the cybersecurity issue. Great concern over an EMP being used against us. I don't know that it'd be used in every area, but localized areas that are strategically important could put us down, could put our financial system down, could cripple our ability to see what we need to see and to react the way we need to react. If they were going to move militarily, let's just say against Taiwan, what would happen then if we were in the middle of having to rebuild our grid and our system and our electronics and try to defend against a cyber attack, and that prevents us from militarily standing with our friends Taiwan.
Yeah, awesome. One more domestic question, and then I'm going to kick it back to Ashley for more foreign policy questions. I'm sure you hear about border security all the time from us Texans, because it affects our state so much. Really affects the entire United States, because we've shipped all the illegals to other cities, and now other states are crying out for help. Thank God. But what are we doing to secure our borders from adversarial threats? And I know that it is a national issue, but let's say, God forbid, Kamala wins the White House next month. Does Texas just build the wall ourselves?
Yeah.
What do we do if we don't get national support in this election to build the wall? We can't allow this to keep happening. In your opinion, what do we do?
Yeah, I am so frustrated by this issue. Very, very frustrated, because when you ask, well, what have we been doing? That was, I think, the first question you phrased. I just want to shake my head and say, we haven't been doing anything of any consequence. And it is so frustrating, because from a congressional side, we passed some really good bills. H.R. 2 was the toughest border security bill that has ever passed through Congress. But look what happened. It sat in the Senate. Why? Because we have a Democratic Senate and a president that's not going to sign it. So it's sitting over there. We tried to use the appropriations process to force them to pass it. That didn't work. We tried to do the SAVE Act this year, Chip Roy's bill, the same way. Brilliant strategy to try to pass that as part of an appropriations short-term bill and get that over. We couldn't even get that done on our own side. And so it's so frustrating to not have the support for all these things that we need to have on the Republican side. And generally speaking, the state, if Kamala gets elected, the state is going to have to press forward with even more action than it has presently. I think the Supreme Court would back us up on a lot more action. I know we haven't gotten to do all the things we want to do at the state level, but it's getting so bad, time and time again. But I do think that there is this growing concern in the Midwest and in the Northeast. They are understanding this problem. I heard a report this morning about the continued expansion of these Venezuelan gangs. Even in New York City, now they're kind of setting up and making themselves more prominent, and the younger kids that are being drawn into this. And so now it's more organized. They were spread out, but now it's more organized. It's a huge, huge problem, but it is interrelated with all these other foreign issues that we've been talking about. So we need to have strong border security. Absolutely. We need to have strong foreign security. Why? Because last year, we had 30,000 plus Chinamen coming across our southern border. Well, now that's a foreign and a domestic issue, both interrelated. And then you go back to that Belt and Road Initiative and talk about ports that are getting built in South America, where part of the arrangement is China will say to these countries, hey, you can't check any of the containers that are coming in from China. Well, that becomes a problem for us, because once they get into South and Central America, whatever's in that container is going to make its way up to the domestic property of the United States of America, the sovereign property of America, of the United States. That might be a fentanyl precursor. That might be a person. We don't know what it is, but that's problematic. We also see that influence in South and Central America, where countries are flipping their tune on Taiwan. Go back over the last 10 years and see Nicaragua and Costa Rica and then see Guatemala and these countries that have flipped their position on Taiwan. Why? Because China is investing in their infrastructure or selling them military equipment or partnering with them economically. And the United States is just putting their head in the ground and saying, well, it's not our problem. It's down there in South America. It is a huge problem. It is a huge problem for us. And so we've got to play. I was a basketball player in high school, and I believe in the concept of full court press. We need to play full court press. We need to play defense on that side of the Atlantic and the Pacific, and we need to play defense, hard defense on this side as well, both on the other side of the court and this side of the court. It's all wrapped up into our national security and national sovereignty.
Awesome. Thank you, Congressman. Ashley, back to you.
Well, I want to piggyback real quick on what you were talking about regarding the Venezuelan gangs real quick. Looking at what's going on at the border, particularly, here in Texas, but then you also look at California, how all these foreigners are using boat now to just try to get into California. Do you think that the United States will ever get to the point of calling the cartel a foreign terrorist organization? And if so, how would that shift the landscape?
Ashley, man, I love this question, because I was talking with somebody last night about this. This is one of the number one things we need to do. If we're talking about showing strength, we do not want to get into unnecessary regional conflicts or international conflicts. We do not want our military personnel on the front lines. We want to avoid that, but you avoid that by strength and showing strength. Mm-hmm. But Mexico has understood now for a couple of decades, we're not going to show strength against them. We need to follow what Dan Crenshaw, he's been a leader in this. Dan Crenshaw has been pushing to have the definition of a terrorist organization expanded to include cartels. And he is absolutely right. He's 100% right. Because if we can expand that definition and have cartels in that definition, then we can get some very strategic military strikes on the Mexican side of the border, on the cartels. We know who they are. We know what they're doing. We know where they're at. We need to go after them. And they will shut down their operations quicker than we've ever seen, because those guys are running a business. I mean, let's just admit it. Life is not precious to them when it's somebody else's life, but it is precious to them when it's their own life. And even though they like to make money, they're not willing to give their own lives for that money. We see that time and time again with a lot of these cartel heads. And frankly, we saw that with the Hamas leader this last week. And Rafa, what was he doing? Well, when it came down to his life, he started running, right? I mean, that's what he was doing, because, these guys talk a big game when they think they're safe, but when their life is on the line, they're going to change their behavior. And that's why I appreciate Israel's strong stance over there. We need to do the same thing. I'd love to see some strategic strikes on those that the head of the snake, cut the head of the snake off. And then also get more auditors to trace those finances, because it's a financial business. Trace the finances, find out where they're going, and put sanctions on the banks and the institutions and the businesses and the businessmen and the government individuals that are enabling these cartels to make their money.
Going back over to the Middle East, to your point, I mean, it's great seeing Israel going after the enemy and working hard to cut the head off the snake. But part of that, though, we see Iran is constantly funding these proxy organizations. We see them funding Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis there in Yemen and other terrorist organizations so that way they can create the conflict and then gain more power or attempted power, I should say, over in the Middle East and try to control the region. We know that Iran believes that Israel is the little Satan and America is the big Satan. What would you say in terms of what is the U.S. doing to hold Iran accountable in terms of them funding all this terrorism? How do we get Iran to stop?
Yeah, we're not doing enough. Like I told you earlier, the Biden administration's rolled back some of the sanctions. They've eased up. They really want Israel to take a hands-off, direct approach with Iran. That's the wrong move. What I have said is, again, and this does not, I don't come at this lightly. I understand that there is huge implications here. I really do, and we've got to be reasonable and prudent in our action, and we've got to be wise in our action. But I believe that there are a lot of Arab countries in the Middle East that truly want peace, stability, prosperity. They want that for the region. They are scared of Iran getting a nuclear weapon, and they should be. But as you pointed out, Israel is really just the appetizer. The main course for Iran is the United States. And here we have, for the last 20 years, just sat back and let the International Atomic Energy folks go in there and kind of loosely look at things and monitor things, and it hasn't slowed the progress. They're within about an inch of getting a nuclear weapon in Iran. Here's what we need to do, to your point, Ashley, and this is really, really tough to say, but this is what it's going to take is we need strategic, debilitating military strikes on their nuclear development sites in Iran. We need to do that. And we need to send a strong message to Iran that the time of developing the nuclear weapon for them is over and it cannot come back. We know where those sites are. We have the capabilities in our military to strike those. We can strike them and then say, as they did to Israel when they sent over the drones. You remember they sent over the drones, they did their attack, and they said, hey, that's it. We're not doing any more. We don't want a greater conflict. We can say the same thing. We can send those strikes in and say, you have lied to us and continued to develop these nuclear weapons. The world will not be safe if Iran has nuclear weapons. We're putting an end to it right now. And that's all we want. That's all the conflict we want. And I think that would work. And I think our Arab partners in that region would support us when we did that.
Great, especially Saudi Arabia as well. I think that they would be more aligned with us. And then my next question, kind of just piggybacking off of that, it just appears, we saw this in the Obama administration. We are seeing it now in the Biden administration. And should Kamala Harris be elected president, I'm sure we will see it in her administration. But there's such a placating to the enemies. We see them placate Iran. It's like they're telling the terrorist organizations, hey, we're going to strike over here. And then we see then with our border, the fact that a report came out that 450,000 convicted criminals have poured into our border. They're in the United States. We know that known terrorists have entered into the United States. Why does it seem that from the left, we see no accountability in terms of holding our enemies accountable and stopping it and preventing it from entering our soil? We don't see that from the left. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, we don't, because I really do think they bought into this notion that it's really more of an emotionally driven doctrine. I mean, liberals generally are emotionally driven. That's really what it is. So fear and anger and sympathy, and so this notion of again, everybody kind of has equal moral footing in this world, and that goes back to the idea of moral relativism that was embraced by the left back in the 60s. It's a totally wrong doctrine. The right side of the aisle needs to stay away from those doctrines and needs to stay away from being driven emotionally on these issues. We have to think rationally. We have to think reasonably, factually based. And so I think they want to be able to say everybody, everybody's choices are equal in this world, and they're not equal. Everybody was born and created, I believe, with equal and eternal value. every single person in this world, everybody. And everybody was created for a great purpose. But along the way, there's some people that make some really evil decisions. And when they make evil decisions, justice must follow. There's time for justice and there's time for mercy. But I'll tell you what, these people that have nothing in their heart but evil, like the terrorist organizations we see, the only way to respond to that, I wrote an article in the Dallas Morning News about a year ago, right after the October 7th attack, that said we need to respond with goodness. But goodness in this case means total eradication of the evildoers. I mean, that's really what it's about. Is there's those ideas are hard for the left to reconcile. They think that goodness means that we never can have any justice at all. Well, and that's not true. Humility and strength go together. Justice and mercy go together. We want the world to have a peaceful existence. We want the world to have stability. But that doesn't mean that everybody gets to do what they want to do and treat everybody the way they want to be treat everybody in an evil way without any kind of consequence. Israel understands that. That's why there's consequences this week for some of those people.
Yeah, that's awesome, Congressman. I like how you put that. It's kind of like I say all the time, we preach grace in the church, but we don't preach repentance. You can't have grace if you don't repent. Grace is available, but you got to ask for forgiveness. And we leave that part out of the preaching of the gospel. We got to get that back. In the last segment here, I want to focus on our election, which is right around the corner. Some say that we had foreign interference in our 2016 presidential election, that it was Russia. And then in 2020, it was said that China interfered with the presidential election. Now we're in 2024. Are you concerned that we're going to have foreign interference again with our presidential election? And if so, what can we do to stop it?
Yes, we are going to have it in our 2024 election. It's already happening. I've received briefings on this. Let me tell you the way it is primarily happening. And that is China, North Korea, Iran, Russia, these folks together, particularly China and Russia, those two actors. The way they do it these days is they're not going into our election machines to change votes. Those two, I haven't seen any evidence of those two doing that. What they're doing though is they're planting stories and they're promoting narratives and they're pretending to be something they're not. So. And part of that has trickled down into what we see domestically. We've seen some organizations that file to be patriot organizations that then go to maybe a person in their district to say, we want to run you in the primary. And they run a person in the primary against maybe another conservative. But then you find out really they're not patriots. They were actually George Soros liberals that wanted to get rid of a Republican. And so they masked themselves in that way. So it's the deceit that works. And that's what China and Russia have figured out is if they will place false narratives and make it look like they're coming from maybe a conservative view, now all of a sudden, or a liberal view, either way, now it's going to affect that election side one way or the other that they want. And they really want turmoil. That's what they want. Now let's go back to the elections themselves, because foreign interference that way, that's happening through the false narratives. It is absolutely happening. That's number one. And AI is going to be a problem with that going forward. I think we need to really put some I want AI to flourish in the free market, but we need to put some transparency in there, particularly around elections, so that you don't have people saying things they're not actually saying, or you don't have foreign officials that are not really foreign officials having Zoom calls with our U.S. senators. I mean, it's a problem for us. But there's also going to be a foreign problem with illegals voting, and that will be a problem too. When you talk about foreign influence, and that is domestically caused by our porous border, that is going to be a problem. I am very concerned about that because of the margin of victory that might ensue in some of these really close states. That's why cleansing these voter rolls is extremely important. What I have said for the last 6 or 7 years since I've been involved in county politics and now congressional is we need salty elections. And this is what I mean by salty elections. They need to be secure, accurate, legal, transparent, and they need to involve you. That's where the why comes in. That's where the saltiness is. It needs to involve you. So we need people at every one of these polling locations. We need people all over watching every step of the election process during early voting and on election day to make sure the machines are working properly, that the votes are being counted properly, that everything is being tabulated appropriately. We need solid paper, at least paper backups for every single vote so we can validate all of those votes, because you can cheat. We've seen it in America. You can cheat using paper. You can cheat using electronic. You can cheat any way. You know why? Because humans are involved in those processes. If we have both involved, one is a check and a balance on the other. And I love that aspect of it, is the paper becomes a check and balance on any of the electronic, and the electronic becomes a check and a balance on the paper. Because I can imagine just giving Harris County, frankly, a bunch of paper ballots and a bunch of boxes. Can you imagine how much stuffing would be going on if there was no check and balance on that? And we saw that. That's how I think that's how LBJ got elected years ago. That's certainly how JFK won his election. So, I mean, there was some real issues there, and we need to have salty elections, but it's secure, accurate, legal, transparent elections that involve you, every single person at every step of the way.
Awesome. My last question is, any election predictions? I know it's hard to predict, what the outcome is. I guess my thought here is, no matter who wins, I'm not sure either side is going to accept the results on both sides, and it could lead to civil unrest. I would like to hear if there's any infrastructure already in place for any type of civil unrest that you guys are talking about in Congress as far as keeping the peace. But if there's not a peaceful transfer of power on January 20th, what would that look like? How would we keep order in the midst of chaos? And do you have any election predictions as far as what the outcome might look like? I'd just like to hear from a congressman on this.
Sure. I'll give you my my prognostications here in a second, but let me answer the civil disobedience question. I do worry about this. I really do, because I think the election is going to be really close, and because I think there's already substantial enough evidence about illegal presence and legal voters in that election that there's going to be some questions about it. But I don't question at the end of the day whether or not our democracy will survive. It will survive. We are a strong democracy. The rule of law has to take root. And here's what I want to continue to talk to my folks about and people around the nation. Anybody that's watching this broadcast is, look, civil disobedience cannot be violent at all. No, never. It can never cross that line. And breaking the rule of law to try to preserve the rule of law doesn't make any sense at all. So, we've got to preserve our democracy by following not just the substance of the democracy, but the process. And we have a process that is in place to try to determine whether or not things happen legally or illegally after an election. Luckily, this time around, we're going to have more lawyers in place, more understanding of what facts to gather, how to gather them, how they can be presented in court, and to try to do that in the timely enough manner to do that through the judicial process to challenge any results that look nefarious. And we need to do that. But ultimately, I have great faith in both the left and the right to recognize that America has to have a peaceful transfer of power based on the election results. And so there's going to be some question, no matter who wins, no matter if Kamala wins or if President Trump wins, there's going to be some questions about the results. But at the end of the day, the overarching need to preserve our democracy and that process rule of law is critically important. And so we will do our best to fight in courts when appropriate and how appropriate, and with the evidence that we can get. But we have to adhere to the rule of law, all of us do, in order for that peaceful transfer of power to happen. Now, for my prognostications, let me just tell you, by the way, I think we will, because and there will be lots of security in place either way. I think lessons have been learned on both sides. There's going to be an understanding of what needs to happen. Those decisions will be made by leadership based on the elections in November. So right now, I don't think a whole lot's happening within legislative bodies. we've got to know who's going to be in place and who's going to be making those calls come January. And those people would be making the calls. Because remember, Congress gets set January 3rd, and that the presidential transfer doesn't happen until January 20th. And so the new Congress will be making some of those decisions. The Sergeant of Arms, the DC Police, of course, whoever's going to be in charge in the White House will be making those calls as well. So to my prognostications, I think we're going to see 52 Republican senators. That's what I think. You're going to see 51 or 52 is my guess on that. For sure, West Virginia, and for sure, Montana. I think I'd love to see Maryland. I think Maryland's next up in that box. Maybe Ohio. We could have a great night that might get us to 53, 54. Somebody told me 56 once. I don't think we're getting to 56, but 52, I think we're going to get to. On the House side, 220 to 222, I think, is where we're going to be Republicans. I think we're going to win the House, and I really feel good about this. And here's the reason why. I want to emphasize this, because in those House seats, there's only about 25 House seats that really shift back and forth one way or the other now because of the way redistricting has happened. There's safe Republican, safe Democratic seats in every state except for about 25. This time around, there's about 16 that are really contested. And if you really get down to the nub, there's about 11 that are really, really close. But Republicans have great candidates for all of those races. And candidates matter. When you get down locally, the local congressional districts, when it comes down to a district that's maybe a Biden +2 or a Republican +2 district, right in the very, very middle that's kind of split half and half, they don't care much about the national scene. They care about their local, and they care about the actual individuals running. And we've got great individuals running, so I think we're going to win that House seat. And I think that means Mike Johnson's going to be back as Speaker. And so all of that will be good for us. Then the question is the presidency, and I've already kind of answered that. It's a toss-up, though. It looks like I feel like, maybe it's just a hope, I feel like that Trump has got more momentum going into the last 3 weeks than Kamala does. She really has laid a bunch of eggs, and certainly Waltz laid a huge egg when he had his debate against J.D. Vance. I mean, that was like the separation of men and boys in that room, right? I mean, that's what it felt like. I was like, oh my goodness, I haven't seen a butt whooping like that in a long time. So that was really wonderful to see, and I think that momentum will carry us. But the question then becomes: are there enough illegal voters to undo that? And I certainly hope not. And I don't want to propagate and theorize too hard on that, because I know there's some great states taking a lot of steps to try to clean their voter rolls and to make sure that doesn't happen. And there's a lot of people engaged on the Trump campaign to make sure that doesn't happen. So there's a lot of things in place. And here's what I would say is let's wait for the results. Let's wait for the facts. Don't fall into the trap that the liberals do. Don't make decisions based on fear and anger at all, and emotion. Don't get caught up in the emotion. So that's my communication to my constituents is: let's wait for the facts and wait for the truth to come out and go through an orderly process, the court of law, to determine those election results, and then ultimately the electors that are going to make their decision. So anyway, it's a tough time, but America will survive. There is hope in America. America will be strong and come back again. I guarantee it. We just got to get us a change in the White House. That's what we need. So,
real quick, 10 seconds. Cruz or Allred?
I think Cruz is going to get this, and he really solidified this by the debate the other night. And you will see, I know the Democrats are pouring some money in on Allred, but they're not pouring the amount of money in that they would need to pour in if they really believed he was going to win, and to flip a Texas to being from Republican to Democrat. Cruz has run a really great campaign. I don't think Collins run a very good campaign, honestly, objectively. He hasn't done the things he's supposed to do or should have done, hasn't gone into the rural areas and really try to attack Cruz's support in those areas, and that's a mistake on his part. And as a result of Cruz doing a great job in the Senate, running a great race, having a great debate, he's going to win by, I think, 3 points.
Awesome. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you so much for being on the Daniel Report tonight. I've got your website up there, nathanielmoran.com, if you want more information about the Congressman. Thank you, Ashley, so much for being my co-host tonight. It was fantastic. God bless you, Congressman, and onward to victory in November. Thank you, sir.
Onward indeed. Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.